something fantastic.
Good. I should.
Yeah.
I just wake up like this. What
Damn,
happened?
Beyonce.
I know. Man. Welcome back to the Think Freight podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We are live at the First Star Logistics Studios. We are sitting here with Chris White. Chris, thanks for letting us record here today.
Absolutely.
Excited to be here in Cincinnati. So, this is a new facility. You guys have been here about a year now.
That's right.
It's absolutely beautiful. I was here when you guys first moved in. Like, you guys were 2 weeks in. There's really not much even on the walls yet. It looks a lot different than the last time I was here. But that's not why we're here. I want to dive into you a little bit, and then we're going to talk about the city of Cincinnati, why logistics is so important, and why it's overlooked in the city. Because I think that Cincinnati's not talked about in the grand scheme of like logistics as much. It's, a lot of people talk about the freight meccas being Chicago, being Chattanooga, LA, but there's a lot of big brokerages here, some of the biggest in the country. So we're diving into that. But first, how did you get started in logistics? How did you end up at First Star Logistics? And how did that early career go for you?
Yeah, so like a lot of brokers out there, I was picked out of a bar roughly around midnight on a Tuesday by a recruiter from TQL. So I think that'll resonate with the other brokers out there.
It resonates with me.
Yeah. I didn't know anything about logistics at the time. It was just, this big giant building, and I didn't know what they did inside of there on the side of the highway. And so then I went in.
What office were you in?
What was that?
What office were you in?
Ivy Point. So
okay.
The main office
HQ.
Before they built the two sides on it, right? Yep. So they've grown quite a bit since then.
They have.
Largest hiring class at the time. I think there was 30 plus of us in that class, and very quickly kind of saw how cutthroat it was, right?
Absolutely.
So not the most skillful salesperson, right?
Yep.
But just tried to brute force my way through it.
When were you coming in?
So that would have been springtime 2012, April 2012.
Okay, so we were about like 5-6 years apart, because I came into Chicago around 2017 under like Matt Stack and those guys.
Okay. Yeah. So that would have been roughly about the time that I was getting out from TQL. So just cut my teeth in the watermelon industry. By the fall of 2013, I was selected as a founding member of the Jacksonville office.
That's awesome.
So 9 of us went down and started that office. And then transitioned into the training department. That would have been fall or winter of 20. Man, these dates, I haven't thought about these dates in a long time. 2014, I think. And I spent a couple years in the training department, moved up pretty quickly. I trained both logistics and sales, which at TQL was, there wasn't as many of us that did both sides.
Right.
I was one of the more tenured sales reps in the training department. I want to say that maybe there was 1 or 2 other guys that kind of had my success in the sales side.
Yeah.
At one point I was number 1 trainer as far as successful reps.
That's awesome.
Jacksonville office grew to 80 headcount, and so we had that going for us as well. And I was a part of a team that kind of condensed their paper material to the digital platform.
Got it.
And when they handed out those layoffs, right?
Oh yeah.
I took my severance and kind of parted ways with TQL at that time. Yeah.
So what did you do after that? I mean, obviously you're still in the industry. Everyone knows kind of about TQL and their non-competes and things like that.
Sure.
How did you stick around? What maybe what decision did you make to maybe say, hey, I want to stay in this industry? Or maybe did you even look at other industries, outside of that? Obviously you had that non-compete, but outside of that, were you thinking, hey, maybe I'll explore other things to, long-term do, or was it a short-term decision?
Yeah, sure. So, whenever you kind of part ways, right, and you have the non-compete, right, you can kind of go to a shipper, receiver. I knew a couple people that tried to go to another logistics company in a different department, right, if you will. I chose to just stay completely out of the industry. I didn't want any of that smoke,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Seen enough people, take on Chris Brown, and I didn't want anything to do with that.
Yeah.
So, so I went staffing.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It was not fun. I
No.
hated every minute.
Hey, were you doing U.S. staffing?
Yeah. So I was working. I was doing temp to hire as well as direct hire.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just not a fit for you, huh?
Yeah, no. Sitting, with 3 people in a strip mall is just not my jam. Yeah.
So now, what did you do after that? Like, walk us through after you were staffing. How did you get to First Star? Have you been here ever since, or what was kind of that path like?
Great. Yeah. So my next stop was another brokerage.
Okay.
It was a split model, right?
Interesting,
And
yeah.
so a little bit smaller. They were kind of in a scaling mode. They had just bought or they were just buying a new building.
Okay.
They were at about 80 million per year when I left. I want to say they were close to 200 million. So it was kind of in a good trajectory for them.
Definitely.
It was my first experience in a split model.
Okay.
And so, they put me on their largest ops team to kind of let me cut my teeth. And then I became a logistics manager. And so that was interesting, right? Kind of getting some more experience with some other ways of doing it, right?
Definitely, because then you can kind of figure out like, hey, what is the leadership style that I can really relate to, that I can, put out there for my sales teams, what works here, what works there, and how we can build something that works, across the board, and kind of find out and fine tune your processes and things like that. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, so after that, when did you start here at First Star? Because I've known you for a little while, and you've been here as long as I've known you. So how long have you been here?
I started here at First Star September of 2022.
Okay, so what is your role?
So I am the employee brokerage sales manager.
Okay.
And I also train and hire new employee brokers.
So still kind of sticking with that kind of training path that you kind of found at TQL, kind of still sticking to that basis here. That's kind of stuck with you kind of your whole career, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. I had early on in my life, I had an opportunity to kind of coach 8th grade boys basketball one season.
Yeah.
And in doing that, I kind of unlocked a passion, right, for training and watching people develop. And so that kind of gave me the, the push to go into training. And ever since then, right, I've had some sort of training aspect in all of my roles moving forward. So it's something
awesome.
That comes natural to me.
That's really awesome. I'm glad that you found kind of like that extra passion in the space to kind of keep that like momentum going forward, and like find that true like understanding of who people are, but also being able to help them achieve what they're looking to do. And also I'm sure that, makes you feel good as well. So it's a good way. So why don't we dive into First Star a little bit? I want to talk, about who they are and what you guys have been doing. How long has First Star been around?
First Star been around since 2008.
Okay.
They initially got their start on the trucking side.
A tough time to start too.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And they started as a, our trucking side is a contract carrier side.
Okay.
And so we don't necessarily own the assets, right? We support those carriers
so more like
that we're looking
model.
for a partnership, right? And we have great success on that side, mainly focused on the drayage space, really heavy on the East Coast.
Okay.
As well as rail yards across the country.
How many like assets are you guys talking about?
Over 900 assets at any given time over the road. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. So what kind of like model do you guys have? You guys also have a brokerage and I believe an agent model as well. So
sure.
So why don't you dive into that a little bit? Just want to kind of get kind of the overall structure of how you guys operate.
Yeah, great. So once the trucking side was successful, right? Ownership was like, hey, I think we could do the same thing on brokerage. And they went out and started recruiting agents at that point.
Smart.
They had some early success there, right? Finding some quality agents and thought, how can we kind of help this grow? And that's when the employee brokerage kind of came to fruition. And so it acts as a farm system, and we have an interesting value proposition for employee brokers out there, right?
Yeah.
Which is, we'll help support you and train you while you grow it.
Yeah.
And then we'll let you take ownership of it and become an agent and get that high commission point. I don't, nobody else out there is doing anything like that. And so, a lot of employee brokers, right? They want that shop.
Yeah, absolutely. But they want the ownership of it, right? Like you see a lot of talk on LinkedIn about the W-2 versus the agent model, because
Mhm.
there is, there are a lot of bad brokerages out there that like to kind of abuse that W-2 model and maybe not, fully, tell their, you know, fresh out of college employees exactly what they're getting into. And they may
Mhm.
get a 5% commission where, you really want to, once you get down the line 2, 3 years and you understand what you're doing, you
Mhm.
may want to have more ownership. I think it's a really cool model. How did you guys come up with that kind of model? And, how has that been working out for you guys so far?
Yeah, so it's really just about, ownership was like, hey, we're not going to be greedy, right? This
Yeah.
is what we need to survive as a business, right?
Yeah.
The rest can go to, right, the people that earned it. And that's something that they did to attract
Mm.
talent,
Yeah.
right? And also to keep talent. There you mentioned, how the commission can be almost weaponized, right, against
Absolutely.
employees. Well, the truth is, the same is true on the agency side, right?
Mm.
The next thing you know, they're telling you, hey, we'll give you 85% commission,
Yep.
right? And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, why aren't I getting that 85% commission? Well, they go, you didn't read the fine print, right?
Right.
Your margin percentage is too low, or you didn't move enough loads to be eligible for that. And so, we're giving you 55 or whatever it may be.
Yep.
Our value proposition to all brokers and agents, right, is that it's simple and it's straightforward, right? We don't want to be sitting here crunching numbers, and neither do you.
Yeah. How do you guys give your agents and your W-2 brokers kind of that opportunity to grow, but also what kind of tools do you guys utilize to give them that like path to success? I've heard a lot of, places they've, kind of DAT, a CRM and a TMS and, set up and go. How do you guys kind of operate, and what kind of like tools you guys use to set your teams up for success?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the first things I think is underspoken quite a bit as well in the industry, right, is how much flexibility a proprietary TMS can give you,
Yeah.
right? When you're not kind of spending the crazy amount of money it costs to have some of these top notch, right,
Absolutely.
TMSs out there. And so I think that, right, is a big part of it. And then we have all the, normal kind of must-have tools, right? DAT, truck stop. We utilize MacroPoint as our tracking solution.
Nice.
We have a couple in-house tracking solutions that doesn't cost us anything. Something similar to a text locate, where we're able to send a link to a driver, and every time they hit that link, it shares the
Oh, smart.
location of that truck. Um, so just some basic stuff like that. Carrier 411, right? Obviously, to help vet carriers and to communicate with other brokerages on bad actors. We're also utilizing my carrier packets.
Yeah.
And then a lot of just process in-house stuff, right? So, some filters and some roadblocks that kind of, have objective people looking at, the carrier you're trying to onboard. And we can't do
Yeah.
that. You're going to have to own that risk if you want this carrier to move your freight, right? All of a sudden, those agents, those brokers go, maybe I can see if there's a second truck that wants it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And to that point, I think you guys kind of go above and beyond, giving your agents and your brokers a lot of tools to really figure out and set them up, for the most success possible. I heard anecdotally there's a couple of bigger, I guess I'll say bigger agencies that, they're pretty lean with what they give their people. It's pretty very basic. It's, very basic vetting tools and things like that. So I think it's interesting that you guys are going above and beyond, and also have this kind of split model where you guys give them kind of the ownership if they want to take that next step in that ownership. I think that's a pretty cool way you guys go about it.
Yeah, and when you look at our trucking side, right? So the trucking side is, one of the big things we do for them is, we're a financial institution, right? So they can come to us for small business loans, right?
Interesting.
We're fronting them, right? Their payables so that they can reinvest. We've taken that to the agency and the brokerage as well. So one of the other unique value propositions that First Star has outside of letting employees become agents, right,
Yeah.
is we actually pay commissions before the customer pays, both to agents and to brokers. And the idea there is like, hey, let's give you the money now so that you can reinvest in your business.
Yep.
And you're not sitting here eating ramen noodles, just trying to hope on a dream in 6 months. Right.
Yeah. So they're more incentivized, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Makes a lot of sense. Is there anything that you guys First Start specifically like specializes in? Like, I know that some brokerages and agent models go like, hey, we're going to specialize in strictly open deck freight or strictly reefer freight. Is there anything you guys specifically specialize in, or is it kind of a mix of all kind of freight?
Yeah, so I think when you run an agent model, right, you're going to get specialists in every field. And so I would say that that's, mainly how it's kind of turned out for us. And so we'll have, we have reps that are doing a lot of oversized, overdimensional, specializing in certain machinery and things like that, all the way to produce experts, all the way to, dry van, high volume freight kind of guys. So it's really a mixed bag. Right. And you get that with most agencies, right? You're getting guys that have found their niche,
Definitely.
right? Riches are in niches, I think they say.
No, I think that's awesome. So I want to ask you, what is maybe that split between brokers and W-2, I'm sorry, agents and W-2 brokers that you guys have right now?
So like the commission split.
No, so I mean what the number of W-2 brokerages versus agents.
Yeah. So right now I would say on the employee side, we've got 16 reps. Of those 16, let's say 12 of them, no, let's say 10 of them are selling brokers.
Okay.
Fairly fast program. We get our inexperienced reps selling within 3 months.
Okay.
Right. So probably the fastest in the industry.
Because I know TQL, I 5.5 months, 6 months is kind of the average training. So I think that's interesting. You guys have kind of sped along that timeline, but it also makes a little bit of sense because I think when TQL's timeline is kind of long. I think that it's meant to be kind of that super immersive training, but I also think that you can get people to where they need to be and get them on the phones and start selling pretty quickly. I think that it sounds like you guys are kind of doing that in a kind of faster fashion.
Sure. And even a place like, we keep mentioning them quite a bit, but they have accelerated programs as well.
Absolutely.
Right. So when you find the right person and you're not hiring 80 at a time, right?
Yep.
Those right people want to get on the phones as fast as possible. Right.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so that's kind of our goal, right? Is to find that happy medium where you feel like you've learned enough that you can actually give it a legitimate shot. And we're not just retraining to retrain. Right. Yeah. And then you asked about the split. So roughly about 16-ish on the employee side. And then I would say close to 70 plus on the agency side.
That's awesome. So how quickly do you tend to see the W-2 brokers who want to move into that agent model? How quickly do you tend to see that happen?
Yeah, so I would say that there's kind of two answers to that question. So we have reps that come in experienced, and we can just plug them to a seat.
Yeah.
Hey, I've been in this industry 10 years. I just need the support of a salary and some benefits, right, to build this book of business. Those reps can become an agent, in a year and a half.
Yeah.
The inexperienced rep, now it takes a little bit of time. There's a big learning curve in this industry.
Definitely.
Right? There's a lot of customer turnover in this industry. And so them, it could be, upwards of 2-3 years before they kind of build the customer base, go through the attrition that they have to kind of go through to learn how to stick around.
Definitely. Now, how is like the team structure? Is it more of that still cradle to grave model, or do you guys have like carrier sales reps and customer sales? How does that kind of operate?
Yeah, so we are cradle to grave. Really, in an agency, that's kind of what you have to be.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
You're not here to kind of share your commissions a whole lot. Now, our agents do start hiring operations teams, so you can see, a large successful agent quickly become a split model.
Yeah.
Right, as he's kind of hiring his own people and they're fulfilling their roles. But generally speaking, on the employee side and the agent side, it's cradle to grave model.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about like Cincinnati as a whole, because there's a ton of brokerages here, and not just here, but also right across the river over in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe I just don't live here and I don't hear about it as much, but I'm more on the overall stage of freight. You hear a lot about Nashville, about more Chattanooga. Hear a lot about Chicago. Hear about all these like freight cities, but no one mentions the great city of Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of our logistics is remote, you know what I mean? We're talking about brokers who just need a phone and a computer, right?
Yeah.
And so, even though it is a hub, right? I think if you go pretty much 500 miles in any direction, you're going to hit most of the major cities.
Yeah.
And so the Midwest is a hub, right?
Absolutely.
And we do have quite a bit of transportation that flows through the city, maybe not necessarily stopping here. But we're kind of in a crossroads.
Yeah.
But I would say it's not mentioned as much because I think, our presence in the industry is a remote presence, right? We're the guys on the cell phones, and the laptops,
Yep.
right? Making it happen out in Cali and all
And
across
everywhere.
the country, right?
Yeah, but I still think that a lot of bigger brokerages, First Star, obviously TQL, there's plenty of bigger brokerages here that have their headquarters or even have a big presence here. Whether that's 100 brokers, 50 brokers, I still feel like this should be more of a city that has freight conferences. It's more talked about in that, hey, this is a city that we want to come to and build our logistics centers and build our hubs. Why do you think that maybe isn't? Is it just because maybe Chicago is so close and maybe it's just not as appealing to a Chicago because you can go 7 hours and you're in Chicago?
Sure. I think that could have something to do with it. It's also infrastructure, right? And there's a lot being talked about in the city about, building out that infrastructure to have more shows and things like that. And so one example of that would be our event center, or where all our trade shows would take place.
Yeah.
That's currently under construction. I believe a hotel attached to that is a big part of that construction.
Smart.
And so, we haven't had a lot of Final Fours. We haven't had a lot of, we lost the World Cup, right? And things like that due to those event centers and, our ability to kind of host things like that. But I see that changing, in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, I hope so. This is my second time here in Cincinnati, and I was telling Chase and a couple other people that we all know, like, this has quickly become, honestly, my favorite city to come visit. It's just like, if you're downtown, it's walkable, you're close to everything, but also just like the outskirts.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much to do. There's so much to see. There's just a lot happening in the city, and I feel like it's just an underrated Midwest city.
Absolutely. Rich history, right?
Yeah.
Both in the arts, right?
Definitely.
Music, paint, right? Pottery, things like that. Before railroads, it was canals, right? And Cincinnati was the gateway to the West at that time, right? It was a better version of Chicago before Chicago existed. Hope you don't take offense to that,
I
Thomas.
don't, because I genuinely see the vibe of both Chicago and I tell my girlfriend, I said, Al, when we go to Cincinnati, it feels like we're in a little Chicago. Like, it feels like Chicago saw Cincinnati and was like, hey, let's build exactly like this. And it's kind of taken like a smaller scale to that. Because even to today, like, a lot of the rehab and like OTR and things like that that are happening, you're keeping the older facades, you're keeping the older outlooks, but the insides are remodeled. You're still keeping some of the brick and things like that, but they're remodeled. They look really nice. And I just think that vibe and keeping some of that rich history like you were talking about is so important to the city.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun exploring the city.
It is.
If you talk to people that are from, big cities like New York City and Chicago and things like that, they'll say similar things, right? Yeah. It's a mini version of my favorite parts of New York City, right? And when you go down and you walk, over the Rhine, for example, right? Knowing that there's like 200 plus restaurants down there, a lot of them, inspired cooks, right? That are out there trying to push their passion.
Exactly.
So it's a cool place to explore. You literally, you're not going to be able to do it all, right, in one trip.
No, seriously. And this is, I've now, this is my second trip coming for a week. I've obviously been working both times while I was here, but I've done a little bit of exploring, and it's like, every time I come here, I see, like, if I'm in the same area, I see different things I didn't see, or like catch, really cool things. Like Washington Park area is just so cool and unique, and everything around that area. So I think it's a really cool city, and hopefully, some of the infrastructure gets there to where we can have a lot more freight conferences and some of those events that come here for 2 to 3 days and can really show how cool Cincinnati is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's dive into a little bit of the market. Everyone's talking about tariffs and imports right now. What are you guys maybe seeing on that side? How have things kind of been impacted for you guys with kind of all that going on?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's hard to kind of talk on impacts, right? I think
Absolutely. It's still pretty fresh.
yeah, it's still fresh. We're still kind of waiting to see what those impacts are.
Yeah.
Immediate reaction, I would say, some people feel it some places, some people don't feel it others,
Probably pretty dependent on like what area of the country. And I know I had someone on the podcast last week who told me he's hearing from some shippers in LA and in Chicago that there's just not a lot of freight to move right now. They don't have a lot coming in for their inventories, but obviously that's very anecdotal evidence. But obviously, if a couple of shippers are feeling that way, there's probably a couple hundred or a few thousand that are feeling the same way.
Yeah, sure. It's a big country out there. There's a lot of customers, right? There's probably some businesses out there feeling similar impacts, right?
Yeah.
But I think, as you look further out, beyond the immediate thing and you look into like 2026, 2027,
Yeah.
I think this is a necessary evil. Not so much kind of what we've been going through, right? That's felt like an unnecessary evil. But this feels like this is going to have a really good positive impact in the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
Once we kind of get through it. And I know there's not much of an appetite for wait, it's coming. We've been saying that for a while now, but bringing back a lot of business and manufacturing back domestic, right, can only have a positive impact in what we do.
Definitely. And I think even if it's not directly here in the US, if it's Canada or if it's going to Mexico, that directly impacts like the truckload movements and things like that about coming across the border or coming into the US. And it's going to impact a lot of things going back down and back and forth, kind of like a lot what we see currently with automotives where they're going over and processing things in Mexico and then coming back. So I think overall, I agree with you. I think that, in the long term, it's a really positive thing. I think bringing a lot of supply chains closer to home, especially after we saw kind of the big disruption with COVID. I think that that's a huge push that we've seen pretty much since then, even not just under the Trump administration, but under both administrations, bringing home supply chains. So I think that's long term. I think that's really, really positive as well. But like you said, there's not a lot of appetite right now for people to sit there and say, just hold on. Like a lot of truckers know we've been in a recession for the last couple of years in the truckload market. So when you say, hey, hold on just a little bit longer, a lot of them say, hey, we're bleeding for cash. So I understand both sides. But it's it's kind of tough for some of them, but also like long term, it's definitely good for the markets.
Yeah, and just my 2 cents on all of that would be if you're kind of out there in the trenches, you're a broker, you're grinding, you just lost your biggest customer, right? Like I would say it's like the stock market, right? You don't want to try to time it, right? Just get your head down and just keep setting up customers, right? And then when it comes, right, you'll already be doing the right things, right, to benefit from that.
What do you, I guess, what do you see? You mentioned the word the right things and doing the right things. I think that there's a lot of people, a lot of brokerages out there that are trying to find maybe that magic solution or the magic to land more shippers, to get more volumes. What is maybe that more steady growth trajectory, or even just like maybe that's some advice to say, hey, like maybe it's not a magic solution, but maybe it's, just diving deeper into your current customers and seeing where they are, or what would you maybe advice would you give to some of the maybe smaller brokerages or brokers out there that are saying, hey, like you said, I just lost my biggest customer. We just, I don't know what I'm going to do in 3 months.
Yeah, great. So I think it's capacity, right? And I don't mean like how many trucks you have.
Right.
I mean your capacity to get through a lot of tasks in a single day, right? So the number one skill that I feel like is understated in this industry is your time management.
Absolutely.
Right. And so just know what the next task is, right? And be able to transition quickly, right? Utilizing, simple tools like templates and things like that.
Definitely.
It can be extremely difficult to be original.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're trying to be original 8 hours a day, 75 outbound calls, right? I'm just going to be original. I'm going to write every email from scratch, right? Like it just wears on you. You're not going to be able to do the output that's going to, right, bring in the inputs that you want.
Right.
And so, your ability to manage time, not spend too much time where it's not needed, right? And in most things, it's not, you don't need that much time, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that a lot of, and I'll say this, when I was first starting a brokerage, I definitely suffered from this, was paralysis by analysis, especially when I was doing cold calls. I would sit here and say, hey, I'm sitting here looking at my shipper list, and I would say, shit, like, I don't really know this company. If I call them right now, maybe I sound like an idiot to them, or maybe if I do 10 minutes of research, I'll know a little bit more. So after that 10 minutes of research, it's like, okay, do I really know any more than I knew 10 minutes ago? Or maybe do I just have a little bit of like high level buzzwords that they use on their website? So realistically, if I just made the call 10 minutes ago, I probably would have 5 more calls already made, because realistically, they're probably not going to answer. I'm going to hit a voicemail. I'm going to hit a gatekeeper. So in that off chance that they do answer and get a live person, well, we can probably have a good conversation. But again, you're just overanalyzing what you need to do and how you need to do it ahead of time.
Yeah, I would say keep your research 60 seconds or less and just be genuinely curious in what they do, both the person and the business, right? You just need a general sense, and then a location, and then it's just, oh, wow, that's cool. That's awesome.
Something you said that I think that a lot of brokers and sellers miss is being curious.
Sure.
Because a lot of times I think we go into it like, hey, I need to sell my services and what I do. But realistically, it's about understanding them and understanding what they do in their processes and how you can kind of be that helping hand and things like that. But I think a lot of times we lose kind of sight of that, and we get into selling services as opposed to building the relationship and being genuinely curious about what their problems are.
Sure. Yeah. And it's, we feel as though sometimes in our mind that if we tell them we're an expert in their industry, that'll give us some level of respect, when really it's disrespectful.
Absolutely.
If you're calling a guy that's been in steel for 30 years and you're like, I'm the designated first star steel guy, that guy's like, you're an idiot. And so, be a trucking expert, right? And be curious about what he does, and give him, that platform to kind of talk about it, because his kids and his wife are tired of hearing about it, right? So you could be that conduit for him.
No, I think that's spot on, because honestly, there's a lot of times where just, you can sit, if you just have a conversation with someone, they're going to know that you're the expert as well, and that you're on the same playing field. But if you're just sitting out here and saying, hey, Chris, I'm the expert here at First Star, I know everything there is to know about steel, he's going to laugh at you and say, shut the hell up, Tommy. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've forgotten more than you know. So it's all about how you set yourself up and build those, I think, genuine connections. If we had met a year ago, we probably wouldn't be doing this podcast today. So it's about just kind of building those genuine connections in the industry, and they lead to, more deals, more leads, more freight overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It's a smile, a handshake, and using somebody's name. Just keep it
goes
simple.
a long way. And just, remembering those, small details. If they mention, hey, I'm going to see my grandkids this weekend, if you talk to them next week, ask them about, hey, how was seeing your grandkids?
Absolutely.
They really resonate with those small, simple things of, oh yeah, I did tell him I was going to see them. That was nice that he remembered. And, it's just nice when, if someone asked me that, I would feel amazing on the other end. Like, hey, he remembered. So it's just being human.
Yeah. It's absolutely important to debrief.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to just kind of dive into a little bit, tiny bit more about kind of the market, because I think that one thing that we kind of miss a lot is our own mindset and how we can set ourselves up for success. So I think that a lot of, obviously the market is what it is, right?
Sure.
There's good parts of the market, and you just kind of have to find where those are. And I think a lot of that is mindset. How can you maybe, as a broker who's maybe going through it, who's trying to build that book of business, how can you maybe shift that mindset to saying, I can do this, instead of like, damn, this is really hard, maybe I can't do this?
Okay. Yeah. So, one thing that I think is changed quite a bit since I started to the environment we're in now, 10 years ago, we used to find trucks in a tight market, right?
Yes.
And so it was capacity. You need a truck, I can find you a truck. I got trucks in your area, right? Today, it's not so much about finding trucks. Anybody can find a truck.
Yes.
Right? Now, today is the truck going to show up?
Yes.
Right?
Is
it going to break down? is it going to show up to the receiver?
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of fraud. And so now I say we vet carriers in a fraud market.
Yeah.
Right. And so your ability to identify, right, if you are in a transactional space where you're posting a lot of your freight, you have to be able to have a standard, if you will,
Right.
and be able to vet and throw out the bad carriers and communicate that with your customer. Look, I had 3 trucks today. None of them need to be hauling your freight.
Yep.
Right. And that's the environment that we're in. Right.
It is.
But the days of, just willy-nillying trucks in there, right? You're going to lose customers fast.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's spot on. I think that it's remembering like you have to have those processes and having all that together, because you can lose a customer very quickly. I mean, if you're sending trucks in there, they're double brokered, if they're stealing loads or whatever it may be, you're very quickly going to lose that customer's trust, and they're not going to be sending their $50,000 to $500,000 loads with you, because it's just not worth the risk.
Yeah, and rates don't matter at that point.
No, exactly. And then you have to, at that point, they're eating the cost, or they're trying to fight with your insurance or their insurance or whoever it may be, and that's a long, drawn out process they don't want to deal with either. So I think that's really solid, Chris. I want to dive into some lightning round. I have some questions here that I think are a lot of fun. So what is your go-to hype song before a big sales call?
Oh no, I do hype songs all the time for my reps, but I don't necessarily think about this. And the hype songs 10 years ago, right?
What was your go-to then?
I'm trying to think what the name of it. Wait till I get my money right.
Oh, okay.
Is that Kanye?
Wait till I get my money
I
right.
hate referring to, referencing Kanye in 2025. It seems like I just ended your podcast career by doing that.
What's your favorite Cincinnati spot for food and drinks?
Okay. Let's go Knockback Nats.
Okay.
Smoked wings, probably hands down the best wings in the country.
Okay.
And definitely the number one place to watch a Reds game if you want to get a feel of the city. So hard to get a spot right at the bar, but just cool spot to look. Tons of stuff on the walls. They still serve popcorn if you haven't decided what you want yet, and the wings are absolutely amazing.
What's one thing people would not know about you or be surprised to learn about you?
I am probably the only cheerleader Marine combo I've ever met in my life. So when I was in high school, I was a competitive cheerleader, and then right after high school, I went into the Marine Corps.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is there a cold call that still haunts you to this day?
Wow. There's a few. Yeah, I can tell a story. So, I've been calling this company for quite a while, right? And I finally had a meeting set up with the decision maker. I can't remember her name, can't remember the company.
Yeah.
But called this day, very excited, right? Tough gatekeeper. And so that day, the gatekeeper was exceptionally tough, and I wasn't having it. I'm the right person. And so I doubled down on, no, lady, I've got a meeting with so-and-so. You're putting me through. I'm not doing this with you today. Come to find out that the gatekeeper was sick that day. I was saying that to the decision maker and the point of contact. She very quickly let me know who I was talking to and that they would not be working with anybody who talked to their employees that way. And so I stood up and said, who needs a prospect? They move freight. And I traded them.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's a great story. Great, a great cold story. Chris, I appreciate you guys. Appreciate the First Star Logistics family for inviting me in again and letting us do this podcast. And definitely want to do one again next time we get into town.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great having you here. We'd love to have you back anytime. Awesome. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Where can our listeners find you guys if they're interested in reaching out or if they're need some freight moved?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're on all platforms, right? So First Star Logistics on Instagram, a lot of giveaways there, especially if you're local, right? We do a lot in the city with the Bengals and the Cincinnati Reds. So you'll see our logos there. We recently had a draft party and gave away kind of a silly amount of prizes, right?
That's awesome.
Just dropped off a Bengals themed golf cart with all the fixings. So a lot of cool stuff on that side. Okay. You can always go to our website, firststarlogistics.com. Yeah.
That's awesome. If you guys are still listening at this point in the podcast, I appreciate it. And we appreciate Chris for coming on. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode.